My name is Michelle Bowyer, and I actually was born in Westminister. I grew up in Port Coquitlam, and that's where I first started playing lacrosse. I won't tell you the year, but I'm in my early 60s. Started playing box lacrosse for the very first women's team that ever existed. It was the Klipettes.
The Klipettes.
So the men's team was the Clippers, and we were the Klipettes.
Oh.
Yeah, so I had logged a few more years before Dave Evans and I crossed paths, but I went from Port Coquitlam, ended up in Burnaby because the lacrosse in Poco wasn't that great, the caliber wasn't that great, so I went into Burnaby to get better coaching, better competition, and Dave Evans came to us only because he was injured when he was playing for the Vancouver Burrards. He ripped his hamstring, and actually I don't think ever did go back to the game. And so he ended up coaching us, and our sponsor was Kirby, Frank Kirby. Frank and Fred Kirby were legendary as far as sponsorships go and sponsoring teams. They sponsored lacrosse, baseball, a few other sports. And so we were known as the Kirby Klipettes. Well, I actually started playing the indoor game. So I started in '71. So I was in my late teens or early teens, and a friend of mine that I went to school with said, "Hey, we're starting this lacrosse team, and why don't you come out and play?" So I literally, first time I got a stick in my hands, it just felt like it was meant to be there. And I didn't have any equipment or anything, so I borrowed some of my brother's stuff and some of his friends' equipment, and went to my first practice, and it was instant love. I enjoyed every aspect of it, and I just never stopped playing until I was well into my 30s after that. Yeah, they tried. The hockey was more their sport, but I ended up actually playing with my younger sister, who, when we started playing field lacrosse in BC, she started playing field lacrosse as well. So my younger sister is actually a very competent lacrosse player as well. I was actually a charter member of the women's hockey team in Port Coquitlam. So again, going back to the early 70s, I played softball, I played touch football, I played basketball in university, but lacrosse was my first love. Not these short little legs, no, not much. I didn't.
No high jump?
No high jump, no. So my dad was quite well known in baseball circles, still is. He passed away in 2011, but my dad played semi-pro ball in Maple Ridge, and my mom was the other end of the spectrum. She was like the high school cheerleader. So between the two of them, they were super supportive, although my mom didn't really like me playing box lacrosse all that much because she thought I was getting killed all the time. But my dad was also an incredible badminton player. He was a Golden Gloves boxer. So the athletic genes kind of come naturally. You know, that's such a great question because being a women's team, we always got sort of hand-me-down uniforms, and we played in a lot of outdoor arenas. I used to practice at the lacrosse box in downtown Port Coquitlam, not far from where the courthouse is. I remember I used to go down there every day. I'd do about a 3-mile run, and I'd get to the box all by myself, my stick, a couple of balls, and I used to practice every day for about 2 hours. And I remember one time there's an apartment right next to the lacrosse box, and this guy comes out on his balcony. He says to me, "Do you have to do that?" Because of course I'm just like nonstop, and I guess it was driving him crazy. And I said, "Well, yeah, actually I do, because I play lacrosse on a team, and I want to be one of the best players in Canada." And he didn't really say anything after that, but what he started doing was all the games that were played in the outdoor box, if the balls went over the fence, he'd go and collect them after games. And I was at the box one time, and all of a sudden, these balls were flying off this guy's balcony, and he was giving me all these balls that he had found for me. And anyway, we were fast friends ever since. Well, that's, again, a great question, because it was sort of a men's kind of sport or a boys' sport. So not all parents wanted their young daughters playing such a rough and tough game. But I think once they started playing in town and playing under Coach Evans, we trained really hard. Dave says we always trained harder than any men's team ever did, and so we started to establish some credibility. We developed skills that I guess were unexpected for women in the game, and when we started winning national titles, yeah, we established ourselves, and people took us seriously. Box lacrosse, that worked to my advantage. I liked them when they were bigger, because I was just going to go underneath them. Well, I guess probably in the early 80s, or actually late 70s, I would say, there was a pretty established box league. And so we had our arch rivals on the North Shore. There was a team in Richmond that we had a pretty consistent hate on for each other, I guess, when we played. There was a really strong team out in Port Coquitlam. So enough that we played, I think we played regularly, like a game a week. We practiced a couple days a week. So it wasn't until we got into field that I guess the attitude towards women playing was a little bit different, because it was considered more of a ladylike sport. No contact, no equipment. It would be late 60s, early 70s. Like I said, I was a charter member in Port Coquitlam, and there was already an established league, so somewhere in and around there, there were a lot of girls playing lacrosse. But the field game didn't exist. And I have to thank Coach Evans again, because when Canada was going to put the very first women's field team into a world tournament, we were already established in lacrosse, box lacrosse, but he started connecting with, I guess, the International Federation, and Canada decided to send a team. So Dave started taking us on the road. So in the late, I guess it'd be around 1980, we started to head south. So at that time, all of the lacrosse teams down the West Coast, down to California, they were all just, some of them were just club squads, Division III tops. But we just started, well, the one time, I think the first trip we ever did, we chartered a bus, and we drove from here, the whole team, all the way down to Stanford University. And we stayed in student dorms all over campus. But it was our only opportunity to play bona fide field lacrosse. Once we got there, we were told to bring our box lacrosse equipment. So we did, because the women down there had never seen box lacrosse played. So we did a demonstration of box lacrosse for the Stanford team in their gym, and the look of horror on their faces when we were out there, and we were teammates, but we were playing against each other in a little mini game, and we were just checking each other, bodies are flying. We were passing the ball harder than most of these women in the field game would shoot on net. And anyway, it was quite an experience, and it just kind of went from there. We started going down to the Western States tournaments every year. We started going over to the East Coast and playing in major tournaments over there. And all those experiences led us to be reasonably competitive the first time we showed up at a world championship. You know, sometimes I think back to those days and I wonder how we ever got anywhere, because none of us had any money, but we managed to go on these crazy trips. We always called it the low budget tour. But yeah, no, we had car washes, we sold T-shirts, we sold raffle tickets till the cows came home. I mean, even the very first World Tournament we went to, our budget allowed us to stay and train in downtown London before we went to Nottingham University for the Worlds. I think we had a per diem of $5 a day. That's all we could afford. But no, we did all these trips. But Dave would often find us summer work, and the criteria always had to be that whenever national championships came along, you had to be able to just quit the job. So we worked for the Parks Board. I worked for Nally's Potato Chips, unloading boxcars one summer. Anything we could do just to make enough money to go on some junket to play lacrosse. Well, I mean, of course, everybody had a nickname. We had one player who was fairly new to the game, and we took her on a trip back east one time to a tournament, and she was a big strapping girl, very strong, bit of a temper. She didn't quite get the rules of the game, that there wasn't supposed to be any contact. So we were in a game, and we were playing, who was the team? It was some big university. They drove up in this fancy bus, and we were in little rental cars, and they had slick uniforms, and we just had whatever we had. We're out on the field to play. It was West Point, the West Point women's team. And this girl kept chipping away at this gal's leg. Well, there's not supposed to be any contact in the game. So finally, I guess Jewel, this is the player, had enough of this girl hacking at her hips and her legs. And she turned around and just grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and was like winding up just to paste her one. We're like, no, 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 stop, don't do that. Anyway, we managed to, stop her from hitting this girl, but oh my God. We had a bit of a reputation, and we actually ended up winning that tournament, so. Actually, I'll tell you a funny goaltending story. So we struggled to find goaltenders, because really, who wants to be a goalie? But we found this girl from team handball, because in team handball, the positioning and goal is just like this. So if you put a stick in somebody's hands, and she actually adapted quite well to field lacrosse goal. So we went off to a national championship at Montreal, staying at Concordia University, and there was a Celtic squad that had come over from Britain, and they were a crack squad that was basically coming to crush all of us lowly provincial level teams. Anyway, just before the game, we were warming up our goalie, and we broke her thumb in warm-up, and so Evans was coaching us back then, and basically got us in a little huddle, and he said if anybody on the Celtic squad got a shot inside the arc, inside the fan, that he would personally strangle us. I think he said he would kill us, but anyway. And so in that game, they didn't get a shot inside the arc, and they never scored a goal. And this is a team who literally annihilated other teams. Didn't even score a goal. And at the end of the game, this one gal came over to me and she said, "That was a brilliant zone you played, brilliant zone." I said, no, that wasn't a zone. It was just us under the threat of death if we allowed a shot inside the arc. So straight woman to woman, man to man defense, whatever. But yeah, we were going to die if we allowed a goal or a shot. So, well, we did kind of trick him into coming out and coaching us, and then with his injury, he ended up just sticking with us. And I think it was intriguing to him that women played at this level, and he thought it was quite extraordinary that he could literally in training run us into the ground and we never complained. And the more he asked of us, the more we gave. And I just think it was such a change of pace from what he had been doing for so long. But yeah, some of the trips he took us on, he wasn't very well received, because in the women's field game, there were no men's coaches when we first started playing. it wasn't even allowed. So we went to a tournament. It was a very prestigious tournament on the East Coast called William and Mary Tournament. All the big teams, all the big Div 1 teams showed up for this tournament. And here's Dave, the only male coach. And so it created a bit of a stir. And so the very first game we played in the tournament, we were horrible, just horrible, throwing the ball all over the place. And you could just see, you wouldn't really want to look at Dave when we were playing like that, because you could just see him seething. So halftime, we're off the field. He's like, follow me. And he takes us up to what we later called the grassy knoll, which was just this little mound of grass to the side of the field. And he proceeded to tear a strip off of us. The air was blue, every four-letter word you can imagine. Of course, all these young college players were looking over at him like, oh my God, this is why men don't coach in the game. Anyway, it was quite the scene, but it had an effect. And we went back into the second half and played quite a bit better after that. But eventually, of course, now men coach in the women's game quite regularly. But both, I believe, one of the Gate brothers is coached at that level. And yeah, so back in the day, though, not so much. Well, I know Dave used to say that if he tried to run a guy's team as hard as us, they would have told him to pound sand. But there was something, I really think that there's times, in sports where there's a certain group of people that just gel and push each other to, the nth degree. And I think, especially like we were inducted in the Hall of Fame as a team, the BC selects 11 straight national titles. A lot of the same players, but it really was a group of women that pushed each other so hard. And Dave always said to us that a team that's going to play together, out on the field or in the box, that team also has to have fun together away from the field. And that was always his philosophy. But he said, if you're having too much fun, you still got to come out and give 200%, because you can't let me down, you can't let your teammates down. So we kind of had that unwritten rule that no matter what we did off the field collectively, we would always bring it every game. And it was just a lot of pride. And yeah, I mean, that group of women accomplished incredible things. And I remember being at the Hall of Fame dinner with everybody, because there were quite a few people that were able to attend. And like, people are still coaching and playing and officiating and running, and so that group was just a very unique group of people. Well, we weren't always. We started out being quite dominant and would go into these national tournaments and basically, kill Alberta and kill Saskatchewan, and we always had close games with Quebec. And Ontario was always the stiffest competition. So there were a lot of games where we'd get to the final match, and it was neck and neck. Lots of times we were down a few goals, and there was just something about that group that you could get up to the center draw and just kind of look around the center circle, and just there's just some kind of crazy chemistry that went on that it would be, okay, let's get going. Let's get serious here. We were at a national championship one time, and we were down, I think we were down 6 goals. I can't remember exactly, but quite a few goals going into the last frame. And I just remember, like, literally, we just at halftime looked at each other, and nothing was even spoken. It was just, it's time to get serious here. And we started scoring goals in the second half, and goal after goal. And as we were about a goal back from this other team, you could tell that it just freaked them out, that they were winning, and they were so close to winning this national championship, and we just kind of came out of nowhere, and we ended up winning, I think, by about 3 goals, and huge party afterwards. But yeah, it was remarkable that this team, even if we were behind, we seemed to be able to always pull a rabbit out of a hat. No, that actually was something that we would always do. Like when Dave was still playing, we go watch him. My parents were huge Coquitlam Adanac fans, so go out and watch, back in the days of Bobby Salt and Mike Reilly and people like that. Like, yeah, just to learn. Kevin Alexander was, in my mind, probably one of the best offensive players I'd ever seen back when I was still playing. I used to try to emulate the things that he did. So yeah, we went to a lot of box across games, and then that was a great place for us to learn some tricks. Back in the day, I don't recall playing a team from New West, so I can't say for certain. Yeah, and then there were teams on the island as well. So every once in a while we would pop over the island or they come here. There was, like I said, there were enough teams for us to be quite competitive, and we were fiercely competitive amongst ourselves. On the wooden floor, yeah.
Is that something you did? I don't know.
Yeah, no, we did. And so now, yeah, going back in time, now that you mention it, there must have been a New West team, because I remember playing on the old wooden floor.
Yeah.
There was always dead spots here and there, and
The ball would
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it didn't. For some reason, it didn't seem to be as hard on the body running around on a wooden floor. I don't think we ever played a national championship there in box. I believe we played out in White Rock. Was one of the national tournaments. I remember playing one in Nova Scotia, which is probably one of the most hilarious trips we'd ever been on. Because like I said, we were always the low budget tour. So we started out by flying into Toronto, and I don't know who decided it was a good idea to take a 30-hour train ride down to Nova Scotia to get to where we were playing. But yeah, so we get to this hotel that Dave's booked us into just off Yonge Street in Toronto, and the elevator was out of order, and we were on the 7th floor, and there was no air conditioning, and it was about 1,000 degrees, in downtown Toronto on a summer night in August. And so we trundled all the way up to the 7th floor with all of our equipment, and down the next day, and we get onto this train. By the time we got to Nova Scotia, it took about 3 days before you stopped doing this, because we'd been on the train for so long. And I'm pretty certain it was the lowest class you could probably go in on the train. And but we got to Nova Scotia, and we played really well. We were the most hated team there. I don't know why, but probably because we had black uniforms and we were pretty damn good. So, but we won the national tournament, so it was train ride home. So we had a bit of a party on the way home and kind of poured ourselves off the train after that and flew home victorious. That was the Klipettes. That was back when we were box players. Frank and Fred, his brother, ran hair salons. So that was
really?
Kirby's Clippers.
Oh, now okay.
Makes sense now.
Got a hairdo.
So yes, but when you played well in a game, if you had a big hit in a game, you'd get a free haircut from Frank Kirby. Like you had to get like a star of the game kind of thing. I honestly, I really don't know how we ever afforded to do, because I literally we were down the West Coast, East Coast, all the times we went to World Championships, it was pretty much pay to play. Yeah, no, 82, first World Championship that Canada was invited to, and we were all box lacrosse players, so we literally took pretty much a bulk of BC players with a bulk of Ontario players, all who really didn't like each other from all the years of box lacrosse competition. And we trained any way we could to get ready for this World Championship. And it wasn't until about a year before that we found out that Evans, being a guy, wasn't even allowed to coach us. So they brought in a coach by the name of Courtney Solenberger from Philadelphia. Superstar, former top scorer in the NCAA division, bigger than life, absolutely amazing gal. And there was something about her that inspired us so much. She continued on in the same way that Dave did by running us into the ground, because she figured we didn't really know how to play field lacrosse, so if we just ran circles around everybody, we might have a chance. So we did. We trained any way we could, going on all these junkets, playing all these American teams. And I remember going off to World Championships. We trained in London. Off we went to Nottingham, England. And we're at the university a couple of days before the World Tournament. And we're out on the field. And one of the girls on our team was kind of mouthing off. She's kind of the know-it-all. Why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? So Courtney blows the whistle, stops the whole practice, bringing in ladies. And it's the only time I've ever really seen her get upset. She just said, "Look it, let's just assume that you know nothing and I know everything. I don't want to hear another peep. Just do as you're told." And that was the end of it. And we went into that World Tournament. We played way above our heads. I don't think teams that were at this Worlds knew what hit them, because they didn't even think we played field lacrosse, which we really didn't. But we brought the box lacrosse game to the field. So it's the first time they had ever seen women with a field stick, which is basically like trying to cradle on a tennis racket. Behind the back passes, sidearm shots. They basically said we shot or passed the ball to each other harder than they shot the ball on net, and they literally didn't know what hit them. So when we went out and played the host country, they didn't expect anything from us, and they sat their captain, who I remember the night before the World Tournament, of course we're all like, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? And I'm looking at the book that the captain of the English team had written about lacrosse. I'm reading her book. We barely just started playing field lacrosse. So I'm doing the math in my head thinking, oh, I don't know about this. But anyway, out we went and we beat the host country. And after the game, there were British schoolgirls filling the stands, and they all wanted our autograph after the game. So we thought, well, that's pretty cool. So it was quite an experience, except then we ended up third in the world. And back then, they didn't have a third place finishing medal. They only gave medals for first and second. Well, I think we beat Scotland to win the third place medal, if I remember correctly. And yeah, we were at the final banquet thinking that we're going to get a medal. And so I brought my medal that they sent to us about 15 years later or 20 years later. Well, I think Evans and Paul probably had some conversations around what that was going to look like. But before we actually started running training camps, there were players from here going back there and playing with some of the Ontario girls. So kind of getting familiar with each other, playing some field lacrosse together. I had the opportunity, myself and a gal by the name of Vicki Burkich, who's a teacher out in Richmond, used to play for the Richmond box lacrosse team. She and I flew out one time and played for Paul and Stan and their Ontario squad, and they were going down the East Coast to play in the national tournament down in Washington, D.C. So it was a great opportunity, and to be honest, I was completely blown away. They were playing all the games on all those fields next to the Washington Monument, and driving up to that field and seeing literally hundreds of girls playing field lacrosse, I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen that many women playing lacrosse all at the same place at the same time. So there were a couple junkets like that where we kind of commingled, and then we just started running training camps back and forth. And eventually we kind of put our differences aside and put together a pretty good team. It was pretty close to an even split, and I don't think there was any collusion around selection or anything. And in fact, the Ontario girls, I think, thought Dave would be a little bit prejudiced because he was one of the assistant coaches on the first World Cup team. But no, I mean, it was really who's the best athlete, who's the best player, who's the fittest. And it ended up being, pretty much a 50-50 split. And of course, we had Julie Norton, who was fantastic goalie from Ontario. So we're really lucky because we really didn't have a goaltender at that caliber at that time. So, and they had Kerry Hardle, who was an amazing offensive player, and of course, is involved very heavily in lacrosse out in Ontario still. Barb Boys, Noreen Lem, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but yeah, there were some very, very competent women out there. Well, we had wooden sticks. Carol Patterson was involved with the team in the early years, and of course her husband Wes made sticks. So he was our stick provider, and so that's all we ever had was wooden sticks. But I remember the very first time we played in a tournament, we went down to Stanford University. We had box lacrosse sticks. We didn't have field sticks. You couldn't buy a field stick up here, and so they gave us like PE issue sticks that had been stuck in boxes. And I remember having this stick in my hand thinking, well, this is stupid. How am I supposed to cradle with this? Because, you're used to doing this with a box stick. And I took this thing at the end of one game. I think I probably threw it in a tree because it was so frustrating. But actually the advent of the molded plastic head stick made most of us quite a bit happier because it was a much easier stick to cradle with and play with. Yeah, the game, has obviously grown a lot since then, but yeah, it was, I think it established us right off the bat that, hey, we had some decent lacrosse players and decent athletes, and I think it sparked things for women here as well, to know that this small group had gone off and played in a world championship and been competitive. We started to get more women interested in the game, and of course, it developed more after that in Ontario because of the proximity to all the universities in the States. And but not long after that, I think we were starting to see scouts coming to tournaments that we were at, coming to our national tournaments from the States, which was really unusual. Recognizing that, hey, there's some really good young lacrosse players. So Carol Taylor, who's over on the island involved in lacrosse there, played on the national team. She ended up going to Penn State not long after that World Cup. Of course, Annie Windover, who became a NCAA all-time scorer down at Temple University, and on and on and on. And so, yeah, it's a really neat thing to see women having those opportunities now in this great game. There are so many people, like I said, when we were just being at the alumni event in Peterborough last summer and talking to folks going all the way back to '82. So it was such a neat thing to have all these gals from all the World Cup teams, and so many of them are still coaching and some of them still playing. Cheryl McNeil, of course, back east, is heavily involved in officiating at an international level, has coordinated 2 world tournaments, with the folks back there. Barb Boys is still heavily involved. Kerry Hardle. Out here, we've got Trish Nicholson has been involved in wheelchair lacrosse out here. Carol Taylor over on the island. So, yeah, a lot of these girls from the original, like 82, 86, 89 teams and all the way forward are still super active in the game. And the neat thing is at the alumni event, a lot of these gals, kids were there. And so, we're seeing future generations that are, 2, 3 years old and they already have a stick in their hands. I did, yeah. So I played in 82, 86, and 89 World Cups. So England, the US, Australia, and then I had an injury. I fractured a vertebrae in my neck playing ball hockey of all things. And so my doctor suggested it would be a good idea if I stepped away from the game. He said I could have my neck fused or I could take up coaching or something, or tiddlywinks or something. So I ended up assistant coaching at the '93 World Championships in Edinburgh, Scotland with Barb Boys, and then went on to head coach for Canada in the '97 World Cup in Itagawa, Japan. And then that was basically the end of my involvement with national team. Yeah, that's been the deal breaker, is having gals go off on scholarship to the States. And I mean, it's been the same for Australia. They've grown their game a lot by having their gals come over and play in schools, in universities in the US. So yeah, there's kind of been an intermingling of players, coming from all over the world. The US has always been the top of the heap, but every year, every other team gets closer. And of course, the last Senior Women's World Cup, there was, I think, 24 countries, I think, around the same for the under 19. So and each year those teams get stronger and stronger. Like Japan, for example. When we went to a World Cup in Japan, they hadn't started playing more than about 10 years before. There they were hosting a World Cup, and they had more people officiating in the game of lacrosse in Japan than we had players in all of Canada. Like some countries have just completely embraced the sport, and it's just taken off. To beat the US, I mean, that's the bomb. That's what everybody wants to do. Unless it's the indoor game, and then it's everybody wants to beat Canada.
That's right.
I was sitting in the VIP lounge with Fiona Clark and Sue, president, and all the World Lacrosse people. Redfern. And they were rooting for anybody but Canada, because they think it would be better for lacrosse if somebody knocked them off. From what I've seen, so I was recently at the Under 19 Worlds in Peterborough this last summer, where Canada placed second. A couple years before that, I went to the Senior Women's Worlds in Oshawa, and I hadn't actually been to a women's game for a lot of years, and I was completely blown away by the skill level, the caliber, just the athleticism. It's absolutely remarkable. If I think back to the early days, we were capable for sure, but now you've got like true athletes out on the field. We're not stealing athletes from other sports now. These are lacrosse players, bona fide lacrosse players that grew up playing lacrosse, tremendous athletes, incredible coaching, which of course, that was the biggest struggle, was getting competent coaches in Canada to coach at that level. So yeah, the game's in good shape. And the indoor game, there's a bit of a resurgence in the indoor game for women as well. So lacrosse in Canada for women is alive and very much healthy and growing.